Hello friends, this is Nick from NLB Solutions, and today I'm going to show you how you can enable Hyper-V Replication on Windows Server 2012 R2. Basically, the Hyper-V Replication was introduced in Windows Server 2012 with the Hyper-V role installed, and if you want some more information about it, you can try to find. There are a few good articles over the internet on TechNet, for example, regarding the Hyper-V replication and what it can do. But just in general, it is a way for us um, to configure our business continuity and disaster recovery and help in the event of any disaster that can happen within our environment, for example. So it's always a good idea for us to replicate the machines between sites if that's possible for you, because in that case, if something happens within one of the sites, you can always power on the virtual machines, the replicated virtual machines on the other host. And bear in mind that I'm talking about a huge disaster where you cannot power on the servers in your site that experienced the disaster recovery, because after all, when you power on the replica machines and they will start working as a normal servers, they will continue your operation. And if the other machines, the primary machines, start as well, it can make some issues for your environment. So bear in mind that this replication needs to be done and needs to be utilized only in the event of a critical disaster. For example, your host is not working at all in the primary site, and you would have a lot of downtime fixing that, or your host cannot be fixed, for example. So I'm going to start by logging into one of my Hyper-V hosts, and within that host I have configured three virtual machines. Two of them are the domain controllers that I've cloned in one of my previous videos, and I've configured one additional machine, which is the file server for that domain, which I'm going to replicate to my other host. So I think that I should mention that it's always a good idea for you to replicate machines that are only important for you to replicate, because for example, you can of course replicate all of the roles within your environment, but if you think for a moment, a domain controller replication, for example, first, it's not always a good idea for you to bring a domain controller from a replica, or bring it for or restore it from a snapshot, because that can make huge issues with the database of the domain controller, and can add additional problems when other domain controllers are trying to speak that which is back in time, basically. So you need to try and identify in your environment what could be a proper server that you can replicate and you can power on later. And most of you you should know that it's always a good idea to have at least one or two domain controllers per site, and that does not include always virtual machines. It's always a good idea, if you can, of course, to have a physical domain controller within a site, if the site is large enough, of course. If it's a small site, it can be left without any DCs. But in this case, I'm going to use my file server, which I don't have any information on it at the moment. This is just for testing purposes, of course. But I'm going to use this file server to replicate, so I can show you what's the general idea behind the replication and how you can achieve that. So there are a few prerequisites that we need to configure in order for us to enable the replication between the two hosts. And the first one is to enable the replication on the Replica server. So if I go here under Hyper-V settings and go into replication configuration, I can see that there is an option for me to enable this computer as a replica server. This is not enabled by default, and you need to enable that after you install your Hyper-V. And please note that if you enable this server as a replica, that means that it will be able to receive replica machines from other Hyper-V hosts. If you are sending this, for example, like I'm sending my machine to my first host, this option does not need to be enabled. But just in case, I'm going to enable that. And when you enable that, you have several additional options that you need to configure. And you need to configure the authentication and ports. Basically, you have two options here. First is to use the Kerberos, which is a built-in protocol used by Active Directory. And you can specify a custom port, or you can choose the port 80, which is the default one. And the other option that you have is to use HTTPS, but this option you need to add a certificate. And of course you can use self-signed certificate, but this certificate needs to be imported in both machines, or you can use a third-party certificate for that. It depends on your environment, but just for this testing lab I'm going to use the normal one, Kerberos, which does not require any additional certificates or configurations to be done. The other option is to allow only a specific server to replicate, to receive replicas from, and this can be added. Of course, you can choose what is the primary server that you are going to add, and note that Hyper-V Replication does not require the computers to be domain. To be in one domain, so you can specify primary servers from different domains and different trust groups, and in there you can specify where to store the replica files. And what that means is, when the primary server sends a replica, this is the default location that all of the virtual disks will go, all of the configurations for the virtual machine, all the snapshots, if you configure snapshots to replicate as well. So I'm going to choose to allow replication from any authenticated server, and I'm going to choose a different location. You need to be more careful with the replication, because the storage can grow a lot with replication, both on the replica server and both on the primary server. So I had issues in the past where by using dynamically expanding disks on the virtual machines with enabled replication caused a lot of issues for the hosts, because as the disks grow, and if they are over provisioned, they can grow on the replica server as well, which can cause problems for the virtual machines to run on that host. And you have a problem with virtual machines going into safe state or post state, or B, you have more serious problems with the host running out of space if you are using the C drive where the operating system is, and the host just not functioning at all, and you have problems with all of the virtual machines. So what I recommend doing here is storing the virtual machines, because the default location is the C drive. It's always a good idea to store the virtual machines away from the C drive. Store them on a different partition, and this is a general rule not only for Hyper-V. Always try to move important applications, important roles that you are running. For example, if you have a SQL server or Hyper-V in this case, or any other applications that require space, try to move the databases or try to move the files, and this is during the initial setup, to other partitions. So here I can create a new folder, for example, and name it Replica, and select that folder. So here I have enabled, and if I click apply, and another prerequisite that it will tell me is that I need to enable the inbound TCP exception for port 80. This is our next prerequisite that we need to configure, and it's good of Microsoft of showing this, because you can enable the Hyper-V Replica, and if you do not configure the port 80 to listen and to be allowed, it will fail to replicate the machine. So this is always a thing that you need to check before you start the initial virtual machine replication. I'm going to click OK to this message, and I'm going to open my control panel, and from there administrative tools, and I'm going to open Windows Firewall with advanced security. In there I can check the inbound rules, and if you scroll down you should see the Hyper-V Replica port. There it is, Hyper-V Replica HTTP listener. And as I am using the HTTP port 80 to listen, I'm going to enable only this rule. If you are using the HTTPS with certificate, you need to enable the other port. So I'm going to enable the rule, and now my server is okay for me to replicate a virtual machine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop on to my first host, and in there I'm going to configure the same settings I did on the second one. And I did this on the second one. I'm going to replicate my file server to my first host, so basically I don't need the settings to be enabled on the second host, but this is just for testing purposes, so I just wanted to show you how you can do it. So I'm going to click and enable the server as a replica server, use Kerberos once again, and once again I'm going to specify a different location for my virtual machines. In here I'm going to add another replica folder. OK, apply. It will say that I need to enable the port once again. OK, so I'm going to go to control panel and open Windows Firewall with advanced security, inbound rules, and once again Hyper-V Replica listener port, enable the rule, and I'm good to go with the Hyper-V replication. So I'm going to switch now to my second host, and I'm going to right click on the virtual machine that I want to replicate, and right before the bottom help option you will see enable replication option. If you fire up this option, it will bring up another wizard, which in here you can configure all of the settings for your Hyper-V replication. So I'm going to click next to this message, and in here I need to specify the replica server, and my replica server will be my first host. I have configured the settings there, it should be good to go, and I'm going to browse, and you can see that it's looking within my Active Directory for the replica server. So this is going to be NLB. I'm not able to write this time. Host 1. Okay, so my replica server is NLB host 01. I'm going to click next. It's going to search for that host, and it's going to verify the configuration to see if the hosts are compatible and can work together to host a replica between them. Let's see if that will be successful. Okay, now that it found the host, it found the port that it is going to use, and so right on the bottom, because as I said, usually you use the replica Hyper-V replica settings if you have hosts in different locations. Of course, you can configure them to be intrasite replication. What that means is that the hosts can be within one building, for example, within one site, and you can do LAN replication between them, so you can have another way of securing yourself if something happens with a single host only. But if you have a problem with the site, you still have a problem. So this compressed data that is transmitted over the network will help you to lower the bandwidth of replicating the virtual machines. But after all, you need to consider, because if you have virtual machines that are, for example, half of terabyte, 500 gigabytes in size, you can have bigger machines. It will take a lot of bandwidth. So you need to plan before that to see if your network will function within the if you decide, of course, to replicate the initial replica over the network. So this option I will leave enabled and click next. And here you can specify which VHDs, which virtual disks of my virtual machine I want to replicate. I have only one in this case, so I'm going to select that and click next. And here you can specify the frequency of your replication. So you have three options. You have every 30 seconds, the virtual machines from this host 2, will send information to the other host, and as you can understand, this will take more bandwidth. But if you have a lot of changes going on to the virtual machines that you are replicating, it's always a good idea for you to lower the frequency, and if you have a good bandwidth, of course, because if you have a lot of changes, for example, a lot of changes are going on virtual machine, maybe 5 minutes can be a lot of data loss for you if something happens with that virtual machine. So you can specify 30 seconds, you can specify 15 minutes if that machine is not used. You can specify 15 minutes, so you can still have the replication. You can lower the bandwidth between the sites and the bandwidth traffic, and that way you can be sure that 15 minutes of data loss cannot be so critical for your environment. So I'm going to stick with the 5 minutes and click next. And in here you have to configure the additional recovery point. So as I mentioned, you can of course go ahead and replicate snapshots of the virtual machines. You need to consider the environment that you have, the virtual machines. If you maintain snapshots of the virtual machines, you can configure them to be replicated as well. But I don't have this, I don't have any snapshots, so it's going to maintain only the latest recovery option. I don't have any snapshots, but you can configure them. So you can configure the additional snapshots as well. So I'm going to stick with the default one and click next. And as I said, there are several methods of initial replications. The first method I mentioned is send the initial copy over the network, and you need to consider that because it will take some of your bandwidth traffic, and if you have a lot of during the day, for example, if you have a lot of people working, and you have a lot of applications that are network dependent, it's not always a good idea to send the initial replication over the network immediately, like you can see the initial replication. For example, you can configure the replication to be sent overnight, so that when no one is working on site, you can configure to start the replication, for example, at let's say 8 p.m. So that way it cannot affect your working hours, and it will send the replication traffic, and again, depending on your bandwidth, it can take a lot of time to replicate the virtual machines. So you need to be careful with this, because for example, if you start that at 8 p.m. and you can say to yourself, well, it's okay, I will send it during the night, but your traffic is, for example, 10 megabits and your machine is 500 gigabytes. You can end up in the morning and you can see that the replication is at 20%, and your bandwidth is pretty poor between the sites, and people start working and they cannot log into their applications, and they come into you and say, what's going on, I cannot work today, and you need to be careful with that. Of course, you can send the initial replica using external media. So you can attach, for example, a hard drive, and you can export basically the virtual machine into that hard drive. And you can go ahead and travel to the other side, and you can add the exported virtual machine, and it will start replicating only the changes that happen between that time when you exported the virtual machine and the time that you added the virtual machine to the other host. So this is another way to do it, but it could be risky because you can lose the hard drive. Something can happen with that hard drive, it can get stolen, and it's not always the best idea. The third option that you have is use an existing virtual machine on the Replica server. So personally, in production environment, I haven't used this option, and you need to bear in mind that the replication between the hosts can stop for some reason. Maybe you have a network outage in one of the sites, and then you have the problem where you already replicated the machines, but the replication stop, the internet stop at the site, the replication stop, and you need to re-enable that replication. But there is a specific time frame that you can start another resynchronization between the virtual machines. There are in the past I had few problems with the replication not working for a few days, and then it will say that it cannot resynchronize at all, and you need to start it from a new one. You need to remove the replica and then create another replica. So this is another option that you can use to reschedule the replica, and you can have, if you have for example, a virtual machine that you had replicated in the past but it's not working anymore, with this option it will find the virtual machine and it will try to synchronize the latest changes to it. But as I said, I'm going to use the initial copy over the network, start the replication immediately, click next. It will show me a small summary, and I'm going to click finish. Okay, so it will configure the settings, and it will say that the replication enabled successfully. I'm going to close that, and I can see that it's currently sending the initial replica over the network. So I'm going to switch my hosts, and I'm going to log in once again. And I can see that it automatically created the replica between my two hosts, and if I go ahead and open my partition where I specified the replica, I can see that it started replicating all the changes. So you can see that currently the virtual disk is being replicated. Let me just lower that down so you can see the percentage. The virtual disk is being replicated, and it's happening really fast because my environment is on a single location, so it's not traveling through a WAN connection. It's basically in a single site, but just for testing purposes, so I can show you. And yeah, let me just, yep, it's happening really fast, so I'm going to leave it to finish. Okay. And you can see that right on the bottom, when you highlight the virtual machine, right on the bottom you have several tabs, and the last tab is replication. And during the initial replication, it's saying that the replication state is sending initial replication. It's saying that it's with warnings, and now that it fully finished synchronizing the virtual machine, it's showing that the replication health is normal. It's enabled at the moment. The replication mode is replica. You can see which is the primary server and which is the replica server. You can see the last synchronization date and time. And if you have problems with the synchronization, they will appear under the status. And every 5 minutes or every 30 seconds or 15 minutes, depending on your configuration, you will see that the Hyper-V is sending information to the replica server, and it's synchronizing basically the two machines. And if you have any problems with the virtual machine, you can always, if you right click on the virtual machine, you will see a tab replication, and in here you can see replication health, and it will provide you more information on what is the state of the replica. Maybe you will need to, maybe the replication was paused and you will need to resume that. You will have, when you right click and replica, you will have the option to resume replication. You have and it will basically say what is the state, what it will need to do. Maybe it needs to fully resynchronize the virtual machines, and it will take a lot of time, and depending of course on your network, it needs to resynchronize the two machines. So basically this is a general overview of how you can enable Hyper-V replication between two hosts. I hope that it can help you within your day-to-day job, and thank you very much for viewing, and see you soon.